I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando. We've studied over 8,000 successful, high-growth leaders. We distill their practices and perspectives down to lessons that you can apply today. What does success and scale really look like from the inside? You think you might know the story of a startup on a rocket ship, but have you ever stopped and wondered, what does it feel like to be on that journey? As a leader, how do you navigate explosive growth and all the things that causes? Today, you're going to hear the raw and real story from inside of one of those rocket ship companies.
Thanks, Chip. I'm really excited about today's podcast. People that are listening are going to get the opportunity to have a seat on what it feels like to be in a rocket ship company. And it's one of the things I really love about and enjoy doing these podcasts is we get an opportunity to talk with and learn from real leaders who have led or are leading some of the world's most successful companies, and their willingness to let their guard down and share the principles and practices of the things that have really made them successful, and also share about their failures and what they learned in the middle of those. And today's podcast is no different. You're going to hear an incredible inside scoop from a leader whose name is Anthony Bucci. Anthony is the former CEO and co-founder of RevZilla. RevZilla is an online motorcycle parts and gear store. And Anthony shares today a little bit about how they built and scaled a company to over $140 million. And Chip, they did this without raising a penny of outside money.
More importantly, Anthony provides a unique perspective. We don't get to hear that often, right, Kirk?
Exactly, Chip. Anthony is incredibly well read. He's articulate. He's very thoughtful. He can really paint a picture with words. I think you're going to enjoy listening to him. And he really shares in great amount of detail the journey that he and his team and co-founders were on, building a company from zero to well over $140 million, eventually merging that company and becoming a category killer. He takes a great deal of time and pride in reflecting on what it took to really build that business. I think everyone listening today is going to get a ton of value. In fact, I don't think so. I really know. So if you'll tune your ear and you'll listen, because Anthony talks fast, he vibrates at a high level, but listen carefully. I know you're going to get a chance to learn a lot of tips and tricks that help Anthony, his co-founders, and RevZilla grow into the company that they are today. I spent about 2 hours with Anthony, really pulling some hidden treasures out of him and what he has learned. And because of the length of the podcast, we're breaking this podcast up into 3 bite-sized parts. Today, what you're going to hear about is you're going to hear about the process that Anthony and his co-founders used to start and generate the idea for the company that eventually became RevZilla. Anthony also goes on in this episode to give a great amount of detail about how they scaled from zero to over $140 million in revenue without raising money, and how that helped them, or maybe how it hurt them. In part 2, in the second episode, Anthony goes on and provides specific details about how they made promoting and hiring a cornerstone of their success. Not just that they made it a cornerstone, but how they went about doing that. He also shares what he thinks of executive coaches and why he hired 3 over his tenure at RevZilla. And in part 3 is great. Anthony brings it all home. He wraps it all up by sharing his perspectives, his experiences, and really the emotional journey of merging with another company, stepping down as a CEO, and what it's like to move from the fast lane into the family lane. I promise you, you do not want to miss any of these episodes. They're all jam-packed with value. But this startup did not start in a garage. It actually started in an apartment. Listen as Anthony tells a story about how RevZilla got started.
So RevZilla was hatched out of our apartment in November of 2007. And the impetus for it was, so my background's technology. I wrote software from my teens up until the time I was about 22 or 23. And for frame reference, I'm 37 now. I worked at an e-commerce agency with my 2 co-founders. before RevZilla, where we built e-commerce platforms for big brands and brands, and really from everybody to Spencer Gifts at the mall to Calvin Klein underwear. I mean, we would build a front-end experience and then build all the back-end infrastructure that allowed the company to sell online. So that's demand planning, warehouse management, merchandising, customer management, customer service, all those pieces, and we would tie them in. Sometimes a mixture of build, sometimes a mixture of integrating what a company already had. So I saw a lot of business models, and what landed us at RevZilla, or landed really me at RevZilla, was when I was growing up, I was a difficult teenager because I've always been pretty self-directed, right? So it's a blessing and a curse. And there were only two things that my parents told me I wasn't allowed to do. They said, when you're an adult and the safety net's gone, if you want to get tattoos, which in my teens, that was a really strong focus. Why? Because, we thought they were cool. They said, go do that. And the other one was motorcycling. My father had a bike when he was in college. And his line to me was, your mom and I are here to backstop you for a little bit of support. And part of that equation is your job is to be a good student, a good person, and not put us in a position where we have to worry about you more than we should. And so motorcycles were on that list of things that I wasn't allowed to do growing up. Not even really dirt bikes in the backyard. I mean, very limited exposure. So I was about 25, 26, working at this e-commerce agency, single, living in Philadelphia. And I said, wow, I'm finally in a point in my career, 2-3 years out of college, where I can make poor decisions and I don't have to answer to anyone. So I picked out a used Ducati Monster Dark as my first bike, which I fell in love with. I mean, most people say, God, that was your first bike. And, 750 cc's, it is a big bike. But I mean, that's like, in my eyes, that was like the Ferrari of motorcycles, just so cool and muscly and matte black. And I went and purchased that bike, took the rider safety course, and realized that, well, where do I go and buy all the really cool things that go with it, all the protective aspects? So, the Italian leather jacket, the Japanese carbon fiber helmet, the really cool gloves with the plastic ventilated knuckles that kind of, all of that makes you look like a racer / Boba Fett. And I realized that didn't exist. And I know that's a little bit of a long-winded version of the backstory, but what ended up happening was the light bulb was, oh my gosh, we should go build what we wish existed, because the local dealership is one experience. There are certain high-end brands from Europe and the Far East that you can only find in New York or year-long riding destinations like the West Coast. And we said there's no enthusiast-centric, there's no Zappos of motorcycle gear, there's no Barneys of motorcycle gear. Let's build that. And that is what the, started with the back of the napkin with me, kicked it around for a couple of weeks, pitched it to my roommate, who is also my co-founder, who was, transitioning out of the company that we were currently working with. And he said, I really like that. I was going to go do X. I would happily do this business with you. That sounds like a total blast. He wasn't a seasoned rider either. So the short of it is, we were fresh eyes with a tech background, building an experience that ultimately solved the problem that we had, which is we want the cool place to go buy all the stuff we can't find that gears towards the experience of it, not just geared for the cheapest price, which was, a lot of the online guys in the motorcycle space at that point, few were backed by big venture capital. I mean, Sequoia had invested in a company called Motorsport that's now owned by Backcountry. I mean, they were there. Their just recipe was very different than ours.
So what gave you the confidence? Because that's a really good point. One of the things that validates an idea, or at least helps vet and mature an idea, is pursuing money. Talking to VCs, private equity, whatever it may be, and they kind of shoot holes in your ideas or help you think about it from different angles. What gave you the confidence? Because you guys did not raise money, which is an important part of this story that I want you to share.
I've thought a ton about that, and I've had that conversation with so many other entrepreneurs over the years of how we were able to be the anomaly and sidestep venture capital. For us, remember, tech background, right? So even myself, I mean, I feel like I tapped out on my coding days at ASP.NET. That was probably the last technology that I wrote a significant amount of web applications in. And my job after college at this web agency was, they wanted to hire me back as a developer. And at that point, when I graduated, I said, I don't want to write code anymore. I don't think it's I couldn't articulate it this way, but knowing now, it was not my highest and best use. It was more the intersection of people and systems and experiences. So the three of us together, because Nick, our third friend, who also worked with us, was working on a voice over IP startup out of Boston at the time. He wasn't living with us. Between the three of us, we could get a bare bones e-commerce platform in Ruby on Rails off the ground. It took us about 3 to 4 months to build it. My forte was more the front end, the experience at that point, the design, and I brought a designer to the table and we wireframed and built it. And the back end chops really came from Nick and Matt, who did just a phenomenal job of getting minimum viable product, which is, okay, we need a shopping cart. We need a way to browse products. It has to look professional, and we need to be able to manage customers and manage inventory. To do that, I originally, back of the napkin, even pre my conversation with Matt, probably would have raised $300,000 to $500,000, knowing where to go from a platform build standpoint. Would have brought in another company to do it, but when we decided to do it together, build became an option that gave us a lot of control over our own destiny. When we started the company, hosting costs were $1,800 a month. Our apartment was $1,500 a month, and we had to have a store, which is a whole story because there was no pure plays allowed in our industry. That was $1,200 a month. So that was our monthly nut to get off the ground. So I threw in 15, 20K. We maxed out a credit card, lived together, and that was it. Allowed us to actually get to a place of cash flow positivity pretty quickly because our costs were all really our own overhead because we were building our own tools.
Yeah, and I've seen pictures of that apartment. I don't know if you had them hanging around the office or whatnot, but you would literally wake up and be at work.
I remember the first conversation we had where we had a gentleman, our first employee. His name was Reggie. He was awesome. He's still around. He was the president of a local motorcycle club in Philadelphia. And literally I remember one Friday afternoon with Nick and Matt talking about, all right, so I know we all walk from our bedrooms to the bathroom. All right, we have to put a robe or a shirt on because Reggie's in the office now. We had this bombed out and depleted. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 3. It was in Old City, Philadelphia. It was actually 90 by 30. So we had 2,700 square feet of a floor of basically a warehouse. It was like the Shredder's lair from the Ninja Turtle movie. Single pane, 100-year-old windows is just terrible. But we scrapped. And that was, the fact that we were able to get the momentum and find product market fit, which, our recipe was different. Our recipe was applying what we knew would work in other enthusiast verticals in an enthusiast vertical that hadn't seen it yet. But I hesitate to call it 0 to 1. We went 1 to many. It was take a great recipe that resonates, solve it for yourself, and put it in and apply it in an industry that people are driven by love, not need. It was hardly we invented something, but we invented it as a derivative work of many things that we've seen do really well in other places.
So real quickly, just before we get much further, tell the site where people can go visit RevZilla and learn more about it.
Sure. So RevZilla.com, which is the third major iteration of the site. This would be, I'd call it major redesign in the decade 3.0. Yeah.
What advice have you given other folks when they ask you about should we raise money, shouldn't we? What were the lessons learned that you would teach a new entrepreneur or someone that's starting to scale?
So if I think about raising money for us, from a value retention standpoint, right? So everybody always talks about grape watermelon. It's do you want to slice of the watermelon and the potential to get really big and monetize it later, or do you want to own the whole grape? And sometimes people that optimize to own the whole grape, they're leaving opportunity on the table. So the way we thought about it, or the way I talk to entrepreneurs now, it's skip every round that you can. The more you can do to create value and show viability before you raise capital, the higher your valuation should be, the less dilution you're going to take. Ultimately, you have to prove a runway to be able to raise capital. There's certain things like products that need to be manufactured or things with high cost of entry where there's no way 3 guys in an apartment could get it off the ground without the support. But I look at it as the cost of external capital is high. The time cost of really managing, the CEO is going to manage all of those relationships, but also it eliminates certain outcomes that might be great for the entrepreneur, but necessarily, over time and over scale might misalign, or you might be misaligned with your investors. I don't know. I had somebody that was a prominent entrepreneur in Philadelphia, a multi-time serial entrepreneur. He said to us, he gave me the same advice 10 years ago. He said, if you don't need it, don't take it. It's not checking a box. It's not validation. There are cheaper ways for you to get the help and support you need from smart people that aren't necessarily smart money. Every 6 months over RevZilla's tenure, we looked at, or my tenure there rather, we looked at what is the cost of not having a better capitalized company? What is the cost of not having other smart people at the table with us? What is the cost out of not being able to burn money faster, be unprofitable? And I really looked at that as, are there people or things we would have done from a systems or hiring standpoint sooner that we couldn't afford? And the answer in all of the cases, because we never raised, was no. The other question I would ask is, how fast do you need to move to capitalize on your market opportunity? If we weren't moving fast enough, that means that the next team of guys in their apartment might come out of the gates, raise capital, and execute on our strategy better than we are and blow past us. Or we might be leaving room for the incumbents in our space to look at what we're doing, tweak their strategy, and just close the gap in the difference in feeling of our company versus theirs and what value we're delivering to the customer. In those cases for RevZilla, we never felt like we couldn't afford what we needed to do to execute fast and well. And we did not think that speed to market, the value of going faster, would offset what we'd be giving up by bringing other people's money to the table, which might force us to optimize differently or really run the business differently. Now, as a side note, I think there were certain things that we would have done sooner that could have helped the business. Better corporate governance, a little bit of regimentation around how we looked at things, better clarity around KPIs and systems that any outside money at the table would have forced us to do sooner. But at a macro level, we had a tremendous outcome. We were acquired. It was a great outcome for the business as well as all of the constituencies all the way down the org chart. So I look at it and I say, I think that the way that it worked out for us in a very organic fashion, based on all that I know now, I actually think that was the best way to go. But because you could make an argument, we left certain things on the table. But I think that there are things that we did, like video and media, that we invested in that took multiple years to pay off, that if we had other money at the table, they might not have been as patient in letting us go down those either capital intensive or time intensive tasks that became the cornerstones of our brand.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. It wasn't a blind spot. It wasn't something that you just had a bunch of hubris around and we're just building a fantastic company, but you were intentional on a regular cadence of just kind of checking in and saying, what is the value or the drawback of not taking that money? Because there's obviously some iconic investors in the Philadelphia area as well as across the United States. I'm sure you were approached. Is that true or?
Totally. I mean, I remember I went and sat with one prominent VC here in Philadelphia that works nationally, and I think he thought I was pitching. And I came in we were cash flow positive, and this is year 2 or 3, and I was looking for advice. And I remember getting kind of a, wait, you're not here, you don't have a desk, you're here to pitch. I was like, no, I just wanted to talk about your experience and what you're seeing in the space and how we can better execute, which was, my naivety back then of, I was like, I really appreciate the half an hour. And then I think the response was, yeah, of course you do. But I mean, we found that we could, we were all in and we were committed and we weren't jerks. And I think that there was a whole cadre from venture capitalists to prominent business people to entrepreneurs in town and beyond that would take our phone call or meet us for coffee a couple times a year. So I think we got some of the network and advisory for free because people liked us. That would be a great piece of advice that I say all the time. It's like, be humble and confident and committed, and you'd be amazed at how many people feel great about just helping you. So we got the value add piece of the money without actually taking the money, but we had those conversations all the time where we started to get some inbound. And I had one VC recently say to me, he's like, oh, we missed on you guys. And I said, listen, when we met 10 years ago, 1, we weren't pitching you, and 2, we could not articulate how we were going to create the value we created the way we can now, or even at year 5. In year 1, we were really iterating, figuring out as we go, and being a little bit more agile in how we approach the business, getting it to cash flow positivity and then beyond, than a team of MBAs with a pitch deck that knew exactly what their model and unit economics were going to look like with a pro forma to show. We weren't that sophisticated back then, but we were less experienced, but we also, we weren't thinking through that lens.
What muscles are you building and what muscles are you atrophying, and being intentional about thinking those either way, whether you take money and saying, what is it that we need to be able to do to make sure that we stay sharp and crisp and clear, or if we're not going to, what does that cause us to do, and how does it cause us to think and to keep on rechecking in what is the value of doing that? But once again, you had an end game in mind. You didn't have a time frame for that, but it sounds like you had an end game of building a valuable business. Talk, if you can remember somewhat generally or maybe specifically, just about what the growth looked like, because it wasn't 2% a year.
Well, I give a talk on a regular basis, the RevZilla story, and I highlight how we evolved into our strategic pillars and really where the inflection points for value creation were for us. And some of the things we can crystallize now really articulately, but back then we felt our way into, or we knew, and we just doubled and tripled down on things that we instinctively knew were working and then could eventually measure that were working. But I mean, our growth curve, so we started the business November of 2007. We did 75K in a month and a half of the year. In 2008, though, we did 1.6 million in top line revenue. And we did that cash flow positively. So while the three of us really weren't paying ourselves, our expense structure was non-existent. We were leveraging distributors in our space to be able to drop ship. We did have a store. So we were a bit sell and buy, inventory perspective wise, we were 85-15. So 85% of our orders we were drop shipping. So if you really think of that growth curve, the first year was 1.6 million in revenues. Second year was 3.2 million. Third year was about 7.5. It wasn't until 2011, the fourth year, those first 3 years of product market fit. And, we didn't hire an employee or do an ounce of marketing until, 15 to 18 months in. So, I mean, the first entire 15 to 18 months was the three of us. Then we had one or two employees. Then it kind of slogged along. We knew that the business was, making enough money to cover inventory growth as well as pay the tax liability along with that, as well as, Philadelphia has some interesting things with net profit and business privilege tax you have to pay ahead of time. But I mean, for the first 2 to 3 years, we created value, but there wasn't a lot coming out to support us. Year 4 was the year it exploded. We went from about call it 6 to 7 million to 18 million in top line. And then we went from 18 to 32 to 59 to 85 to, I want to say 115. So, I mean, that was literally, and then my last year we did, I want to say it was like in the 140s. So, I mean, that was, I can remember it verbatim because it was so insane, but I mean, it was obviously start with a very small number and then it's 100% growth, 100% growth, 180% growth. Then it was 100% growth, 80% growth, 60% growth. So, I mean, we saw every year the degree of complexity and scale. Every time we thought we were either hiring ahead or building process ahead, every time you triple your headcount or your top line, everything breaks. And that was something that I took away as kind of a common theme. So, I mean, it was consistently trying to kill us. But I mean, that growth curve was the biggest challenge because you're trying to maximize your ability to capture your market opportunity while not being a terrible operator at the same time.
So the muscles that you built early on when you said like you guys weren't taking the siren, you're figuring out how to be cash flow positive and thinking about the business, at a very detailed level and building processes and systems where you guys were communicating when things started doubling, tripling, and you're increasing the head count, increasing the complexity in the business, inventory, all these other things. Do you think the habits, what I'm calling muscles, the habits that you built when you were young, started in the business, how did those serve you later on? And like I said, it may be something that was just kind of unconscious because you'd kind of done that.
Oh my gosh, it couldn't be further from the truth. So the way I've always talked about it is maker, manager, executive, right? That's the arc. And that's, I didn't invent that. That's when you start a company, you start it because you can build something. We created a product and a platform that didn't exist. We were makers. And, I talk to people that are like, talk to us about the early hires. And I'm like, I see that the pattern and I didn't, this isn't my framework that I'm articulating. I picked this up somewhere and it's perfect. The first 10 employees of any company are, 9 people that can figure anything out and 1 person that can sell anything. I was the person that could sell anything early on, and my co-founders were developer archetypes and systems and process archetypes, which I got much better at later. And then our first, 7 employees after them were generalists that were young, enthusiastic with a degree of a detail that we could just say, we need to figure out how to put new lighting in the warehouse, or we need to figure out how to re-architect the customer flow because we're using our own inboxes for it these days. I mean, they were the types of tasks. Round 2 of that, right? And you find yourself very tactically, almost scrum-like every day. Everybody's in the same room. You can communicate to everybody, keep them on the same page. You know implicitly everything that's going on because you're tiny. Then you go to manager, which is, okay, you learn how to take your hands off the wheel, which is excruciating for founders that start as makers. We didn't delegate fast enough. We didn't scale ourselves fast enough. And you're saying, well, I need to be able to trust but verify and build a replicable process that I understand the outcome, the inputs and the outputs. And again, 8 years ago, we couldn't articulate it this way, but that's what we were trying to do, right? You're hiring a team to hopefully delegate everything non-critical, as far away from you as you possibly can, as fast as you can. But then there's the executive function, right? So you become bigger. And now it's about resource and time allocation, capital allocation, and vision and mission and values and managing managers and hiring. I mean, the first 50 people you hire are going to hire the next 300 people that you hire, right? And how do you put the pieces in place that really allow you to scale the machine? And I mean, Kirk, you came on and you saw the last couple of years of it with me. I mean, even at that point, there were pieces we hadn't figured out where you kind of cross this chasm where you're at scale, it's a bigger organization, but the things that you don't really have polished, that are extremely clear, that are extremely scalable, over $100 million in revenue, over a few hundred people in headcount. I mean, they're just going to continue to break until you get them right. And that was the evolution of building new muscle along the way, to where when you start, you're the genius with a ton of helpers. And when you end, you're the servant leader, where literally the pyramid's inverted and you're there to pull roadblocks, create extreme clarity about what is success looks like, hire the tallest, smartest people you can, and then just get out of the way. And I'd like to say that I got pretty good at that, but I did that like anything else in life, trial by fire the whole way. And then some points, those inflection points of maker to manager to executive in the middle were the hardest, where you say, this was working a year ago. It's no longer working. What happened? It's because the archetype of my job changed.
That is perfect. People that are listening really need to go back and listen to that last couple minutes, because I think that, and I really appreciate you saying, like, we couldn't articulate this 8 years ago, but as you look back at it and be able to describe it, that is spot on what happens in successful high growth companies. Do you remember what happened in year 4? That was there anything in particular that you would point to that caused the explosion?
We had gotten our catalog right. We had enough time to get all of the brands right. So I'll go back to Anthony's salesman early in the business. When we came to the table, people said, oh, it's another internet discounter that's just going to fleece our industry and hurt the dealer. Because remember, in the motorcycle industry, it was like 7,000 to 10,000 mom and pop dealerships nationwide. There weren't a ton of big conglomerates at the table. And the internet guys, when we started the business, were really viewed as predatory, where they were just kind of fly-by-night discounters, really took and crushed the unit economics of transactions for the whole industry, because the industry hadn't figured out how, it's a technical product. It takes tons of R&D. The easiest thing for a new player to do is to take a premium product and discount it. Well, it hurts the brands, hurts the customer in the long run, and hurts the dealerships or the infrastructure of brick and mortar. So when we came online, we had to convince everybody to work with us. And we said, listen, our play is to create service level and experience the mission was advance the experience of the motorcycle enthusiast. So we try to align our mission with helping people enjoy the sport. And that became a service-oriented, medium to long-term approach to value creation that really created a virtuous cycle for us. But you asked me specifically about year 4. By year 4, our actions had spoken louder than words. People in the industry, which at the time was very much an old boys club, the rider population of motorcycles is like 85% male. And the industry is dominated by big manufacturers and really a good old boys network, for lack of a better term, that has been in place for 40 to 50 years. So people had finally gotten comfortable with us. We finally had our selection where we had all the key brands. We understood their product life cycle. We understood when they were launching products. We earned the right to be in the know of when they were doing major things, so we could support them with marketing. And that was the year by way of paid marketing, SEO, video content, written content, customer service level, to where when a new $800 helmet that was a game changer for the entire motorcycle world was launching to the market, not only were we the megaphone for the brand, but we are also the Sherpa for the customer, because when it launched, we had access to it. We said, this is how it works. This is what it doesn't do. This is how you should buy it. And we were doing that across a very mature catalog of all of the, imagine that at scale. So it was the first time that we had really captured a spring season where we had our ducks in a row, to where the business was, instead of RevZilla as a new company, we were an emerging company that was positioned really well, that had done enough trial and error to understand the recipe, to where we really we had really just captured a lot of demand. And honestly, like, one of the things we left on the table is, if we'd raised money earlier, from the right mix of people that had seen way more businesses than we had. So I'll use a great example. Like, if if first round capital would have invested in RevZilla early, which I don't think they would have, because I think that our market opportunity would have been too small for them. We would have heard from people that had seen more than we had seen, and we probably would have gotten more of the recipe right sooner and focused on things that would have worked more quickly. But we didn't. So it took us 3 to 4 years to really figure it out on our own. But then once we did, it was off to the races.
Okay, that's great. You mentioned a little bit earlier about strategic pillars. Talk a little bit about not just what they were, but how do you use those inside the business to help get people focused?
I sat on a plane flight back from Indianapolis, and I want to say 2011 or 12, next to I want to say he was a PE guy. We ran a family office. I mean, we're in like 16C in coach, and I have my laptop open, and he's seeing me obviously working through a company dashboard. And I just get like the very general, oh, what do you do? We start talking, and I start telling a little bit more about the ARC, just because we were having a savvy business conversation. And he said, it's a great book for you potentially at this moment. He goes, I was in your shoes once. And he mentioned the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which was a great seminal read. We were already doubling and tripling down on things that customers were telling us, both with voting with their credit card as well as leaving us reviews and giving us feedback that we love this, do more of it, RevZilla. But really, if you think about that, it really became for RevZilla, can we be the Cirque du Soleil to everybody else's Barnum and Bailey, where everybody in the industry is focusing on endless aisle, speed of delivery, and discount price? We said, you know what, we're going to have prices that we're going to be price competitive, but we're never going to be the cheapest. But we're going to focus on service, because people need help to choose protective products that are expensive, especially online. We're going to focus on content, because it's going to allow us to help, again, educate our consumer as well as build authority around how people view RevZilla. And we're going to focus on technology, which the original thesis was really just before we figured out the original content piece, it was really service level and technology to build a better experience. That was the original bet, was that technology and experience in an enthusiast vertical can win against more mass market focused approaches. So that was the three big strategic pillars of RevZilla were, things that are harder to commoditize, right? As how far away from Amazon can we be? We're going to have a base level of competition, again, and compete where we have to on price and on speed of delivery, on service level, but then offer human knowledge, offer content, and offer technology to create a more robust experience and value add for the consumer.
So it'd be a huge miss not to talk about kind of the legend that is Anthony. If anybody goes into YouTube or goes to RevZilla's site and looks up Anthony, they will see that he is an on-screen personality for sure.
Hey, this is Anthony with RevZilla. You watch, decide, and ride. Welcome to
Talk a little bit about what got you into that, because it would have been easier to have just maybe done catalogs, maybe done some blogging, done some light content, but you created a full production studio and helped your customers really understand, like I said, what it is they're buying, why they're buying it, and all those other parts.
So I'm going to go back to the kernel that spawned it all. And honestly, I would say to any entrepreneur out there, you hear, I think this is an old Paul Graham out of Y Combinator, eat your own dog food. I could be wrong, but I think that's where they came from. And there were two things working for us. The first one is that we set out to solve a problem that we actually had. Fresh eyes to the industry, new riders, wishing something like we were building actually existed, right? So you knew that you're starting from an empathetic place of building for your pain that ultimately turned into a lot of other people's pain as well, right? Solving a problem. The second thing we did really right, or that really helped us, is if you heard me earlier, we didn't market the business, but more importantly, we didn't hire anybody for like 15 to 18 months. Matt, Nick, and I took every phone call, answered every email. We talked to every customer. And back then, 1.6 million in top line, average order size in the beginning was like $160. It was enough customers to where we could really home in on what their pain was. And what we found was, it's very easy for somebody to buy oil or a tire, right? Like there are commoditized products that we were carrying that were impulse buys or need-based, right? They knew what they needed and checked the box. And a lot of those sales, we'd lose the cheaper person and the cheaper competitor. But what we found was we kept having this conversation. I always talk about the mythical Bob from the Pacific Northwest. So I get a phone call, or Matt would get a phone call, and the guy would say, hey, listen, and remember, it's 85% male. I said, my name's Bob. I live in Seattle. I love motorcycling. I ride 200 days a year. This is the type of bike I ride. I have $300 to $500 to spend on a jacket. I have a big belly and I run really hot. So I need something with a lot of vents. But remember, I get rained on every other day. So it also has to be waterproof. And I like the color yellow and I like the color black. What are my options? To do that call right, that is an hour-long conversation, walking a person over the phone through essentially like the wizard or the buying choices to curate, based on our own product knowledge, saying, and some of it we were new, but we knew our brands really well. We learned our products really well. And we said, okay, Bob, I can help you. We realized that we were Sherpaing and creating all this value for Bob that he literally, the only other way he could get that experience was to walk into an excellent motorcycle dealership and find the one person that worked in apparel to literally walk him through the entire assortment. But he didn't have that option because in many cases, Bob lived an hour and a half from the nearest dealer, or he lived in a place where, because it was only a 6-month riding season due to weather, there weren't really big dealers. There were kind of more mom and poppy or smaller dealers. At the end of the phone call with Bob would say to us, Anthony, I cannot believe you existed. I cannot believe you know what you know, and I cannot believe you spent an hour with me. I will take you the RevZilla torch. I will go back to the people I ride with, and I will make sure that as a token of my gratitude, they know, 1, you exist, 2, you're amazing, and 3, that you're a resource for motorcyclists wherever they are. Thank you so much. I hope nothing ever changes. And that person would get off the phone, and we would see that they would send a thank you note. They would order from us once every few months. We started hearing that this mythical level of service we were providing was unbelievable. But we all looked at each other and said, okay, we know we're the founders, and founder bandwidth is the scarcest resource. But even if we build out customer service, how can we scale parts of that conversation so the person calling in is not starting from zero? And what we started doing was we were in the forums, and we'd get new product lines, and we'd write blog posts, or we'd post the new products from key brands in the forums where these riders hung out. Because again, lifestyle enthusiast sport, the forum aspect was still huge, even in 2007, where depending on bike or riding style, like adventure riding or Honda sport bike, you'd have these very specific niche forums, and we'd have those conversations there. Then we took it a step further, and the hope was better educating the customer before they called us, so they were more up to speed, and it could create maybe some scalability to what still was an amazing conversation where our value was helping someone decide instead of fully educating them. We even at one point had a mock photo drop right in front of my desk, and we all worked in the same room. And somebody would say in a forum that was a really high-end forum for BMW riders, I'd love to see this jacket and pant on a guy that's 6 foot in this color combination. We'd send a customer service person. We had like 5 employees to the warehouse. We said, pull that item, because over time we started carrying more and more inventory, put it on. Within 5 minutes, I'd have a picture of them, would post it to the forum. And people say, I can't believe you did that for me. Thank you so much. That's unbelievable. I can't get this anywhere else. But the big aha moment was, how do you scale all of that? How do you make it so that people can still have an amazing experience with highly trained riders on the phone when they need, but instead of an hour-long conversation, how can we frame it so that Bob calls and says, hey, listen, I've done thank you for creating a ton of content and a ton of assets for me to get up to speed. I have it narrowed down to these 2 or 3 choices. Will you help me decide between the 2 based on fit or based on your opinion? And how we did that was on a hunch. Summer of 2009, we said, let's try to do some video. We have, a flip cam. We didn't have microphones. We had bad lighting. We said the worst that somebody can say is, we hate these guys, or this doesn't work, and take it down. And ultimately, we did reach out to some networks that in Philly, like on Craigslist, and try to find maybe some QVC talent, people that were more comfortable in front of the camera. Can we cheaply get somebody to come be the spokesperson? Our original thesis was have a host that's connected to RevZilla, and then bring in the product specialists from the brands and have like a 2-man show to describe and explain how these products work. One, we couldn't afford to get somebody that actually was an on-air talent with any experience. And 2, what we found was when we brought the people from the brands in, it became overly salesy and it cheapened the credibility. So I said to Matt and Nick, I said, listen, you know that one of my superpowers is communication. We've been doing this long enough. Let me pop in front of the camera. If people say, why is the guy from the Jersey Shore talking to me about my motorcycle gloves? The worst that can happen is the internet will take it down. But that summer of 2009, the response was immediate. The response was extremely positive. It was all qualitative at that point. We couldn't we couldn't directly attribute it back to an increase in conversion rate or sales. But within like 6 months, we said, let's give it 6 months. And I would shoot once a month, and we'd have a new brand come in. The person from the brand started with me on camera. Within the first 2 months, we said, it's just going to be me. Let's work through the products, make sure we get the tech details right. And then I'm going to offer really a product overview. And what we started hearing on the phones within the first 6 to 12 months was, I watched all this video. I saw Anthony. Oh, that's one of the co-founders. And the conversation really did turn to, the customer was way more educated. Regis McKenna, who was I think it was Weeden Kennedy or Wyden Kennedy, that was an early Apple advertising agency. And one of his maxims was, education is a tremendous form of marketing. And I butchered that a little bit, but that's the takeaway. What we found was we were brand building by educating our consumers because we were offering them something of value. And it completely, at this stage, we've scaled it. And we can get into those weeds if you want, but that became the third cornerstone: service level technology, but then original content and media to support the rider. To educate them, really. It became our calling card that was really hard for people to compete with us on.
A couple of really critical points that I also pull from that is I hear so many people, because they know it's the right thing to do and they understand it, and they talk about customer centricity and putting the customer at the core of how we make decisions. But I think if you look at the actions, they really don't serve that well. And just to think about how that's what you guys did, but then you came to this fork in the road where you had to decide how to scale that. One part of it is the media, but also you also had people that were answering the phones like you guys did when you got the business going, that were answering those questions, correct? That was another part of scaling that service, right?
Absolutely. So for us, it became very clear that we had set a precedent as to what RevZilla would be known for with every customer touch point, whether it was forum, email, phone, Facebook. So our goal was to be channel agnostic, but deliver an authentic and highly valuable interaction wherever someone chose to contact us. So scaling that piece, we essentially put a stake in the ground on what our brand promise was going to be. So outside of the media, which facilitated all of that and created authority as we matured it, scaling the rest of the business was a huge undertaking around service level. And I really give a lot of credit to my co-founder, Matt, who took that on early. Nick and I were the first ones to step out of customer service. Matt kept that, and we agreed on what the brand promise was going to look like. But really, Matt stayed close to it, stayed on the phones for a long time, and really scaled out that team tremendously, both qualitatively and quantitatively, the whole way through a tremendous expansive product catalog as well that became harder to really know the ins and outs of when you're talking about a helmet versus an engine component over time.
Those strategic pillars are essentially the strategic battlefields that you have to be able to win on. You mentioned Amazon. For Amazon, they recognized pretty early that they had to have the best selection, the best price, and the most efficient way to deliver. And if they weren't going to do that, then they were going to their business model was not going to be what they wanted it to be. But it informs everything else that comes out of that. And I think a lot of times companies, struggle with that, and it is a struggle. And sometimes it does take time. It doesn't just fall into your lap. But having spent time with you, spent time with the business, it's not something that you just hung up around the building or something that you just put in your all hands, but it is something that really informed how people thought and behaved, and even how you hired against the importance of those pillars.
Oh, 100%. You only have so many resources, right? And that's time and capital. And the last thing you want to do is be investing them in places or doubling down in places where the best you're going to be is second fiddle, right? Speed, price, and selection. If that's your strategic, if that's what you think your mode is, to go find another business to do, because Amazon's already won. That's the challenge with retail right now, is that it's really been so much winner take all. And I still look at the long tail of products, right? A lot of what you watch Walmart and Jet these days, what Mark Lurie's doing with dynamically or digitally native vertical brands. And then you look at enthusiast spaces where people are driven by almost emotion, irrationality, and love, because the things they're buying are things they don't need, things they make them happy. You can create a lot of value around that. But if it's things that people need, toasters, diapers, even brake fluid and fuel, I'm sure Amazon has for a long time and will sell way more motorcycle oil than we ever sell, because somebody that's buying diapers that day can just add it to their cart and they need no help with it. And they really don't care. If it checks the box, it checks the box.
Wow. Anthony really did a good job, I think, of providing a lot of insights and value in this episode. Some of the things that stood out to me were his thoughts about not raising money and how that did help and or hurt them, and how he really took seriously the idea of focusing on the consumer. And I really enjoyed and appreciate how he talked about everything breaks at scale, not just stating that obvious fact, but how he actually thought about that and prepared for that. And he knew that everything that he put into place was eventually going to break, and he was always planning for that versus, when things broke, being all upset and distraught and wondering why things didn't work. He actually planned for that. I love that. One of the highlights for me was the overly obvious and embarrassingly simple but very powerful statement. He said, the more you can create value, the higher your valuation will be. That sounds like a no duh kind of comment, but stop and think about it for a second. Oftentimes we obsess about what is our funding amount, what is the valuation that we're going to get, what are we getting, or are we getting diluted, how much equity are we giving or not giving. And if we just focusing on adding value to all the stakeholders that are at the table, the investors, the customers, the employees, all the stakeholders, if that's all we focus on, our valuation will go up. Sounds overly obvious, embarrassing, simple, but very few people do it. Great advice. I want you to stay tuned to the next episode. He does a great job about talking about how they went about hiring and promoting and making that a cornerstone of the business. In fact, Anthony says he's a self-described nerd when it comes to hiring. He has studied it and practiced and learned from the mistakes that he's made and the things that he's done well in that. And he shares the details of that in this next episode. The other thing he talks a little bit about is just how he has used outside resources, coaches, mentors, and others to really help shape him as a leader and help him become better. And he's got a unique philosophy on that I think you'll appreciate and enjoy. And then in episode 3, right after that, Anthony brings it all home, ties it all together, talks about what it's like to grow a company to over $140 million, recognize the need to merge with another company and become essentially a category killer. He talks a little bit about the emotional journey of stepping down as a CEO and moving from the fast lane into the family lane. I think you'll really enjoy that. What do you think of the For You Leaders podcast? Can you think of anyone that would benefit from listening to today's episode, or maybe one of the episodes from the past? If you'd please do me a favor and share it with them. Also, if you would please leave us a review on iTunes, that would be extremely helpful. Your feedback is not only incredibly helpful to us, I hope that you really see it as a way of helping yourself and helping others. And the reason for that is because we take your feedback very seriously. We will incorporate your suggestions and ideas into future podcasts. After all, this is called the For You Leaders podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. Go and have a blessed day.